Let's take a look at graphing on a TI-85 graphing calculator. First one we'll look at is y is equal to x. Now, a lot of these would be pretty simple graphs, and you're sitting, well, I already know what it looks like. That's not the point here. The point here is to learn the basic building blocks so that we can merge these together into more complex functions and graphs later on. So even though you know what this looks like, be sure you know how to plug it in your calculator. Okay, well, on this one we got a graph button here, so I'll push the graph button. Now when that pops up, you got options down here at the bottom, and if you don't see y of x there, you see another line there, whatever it might say. Press the exit button to get this here, because you want this line to be looking just like this. We'll push the F1 because F1 is right below the y of x, and you should see this up here. And then we'll press clear to clear wherever's not line. Two ways you can do the X key. There's an X bar right here. You can push this button, or you see the X, the button right below it is F1. I'll push the X bar. Now graph. You see graph is over here and some black. Well, the select is what's right here. So if I do F5 now, it'll choose select. And that's not what we want. So we'll push the exit button one time to bring that menu down. And then I'll push the F5 to graph. And that'll be what our graph looks like. So it looks like that right there. Okay. Let's say you got an error of some sort. Doesn't quite look like that. Well, we'll talk about this. Doesn't have the typical errors that TI-3, TI-4 does. But if I go to the zoom, I press F3, and if you don't see that, like if I exit out, how to exit out? Second exit. Okay, I'm completely out. Again, you go back into your graph, and you should see this here. And if you have a menu below it, then press your exit to bring that out. That's interesting. You exited out that time. Okay. But anyway, we want to go to zoom. So I press F3, and I want to choose Z standard. And once I press the zoom, see it pops up another menu. Z standard, the button right below it is F4. So press F4. And that'll set it back to your standard viewing window. Sometimes that gets screwed up, and you have to set it back to that. And again, see how we got two menus now? X gets rid of that first menu, and I guess exit takes you out of that one. Let's take a look at y is equal to x squared. I'm definitely not an expert on a TI-85. Mostly what we use in class is a TI-3, TI-4. Okay, TI-85. Graphing x squared. Well, I want to go back in my graph, so I exited out. I press graph. We want to go into y of x, so I press F1. I press clear to clear out wherever's not line. I'll push my X bar button, and I want to click the x squared button. Now I want graph, and graph is up there on my second option, so I'm going to do exit to get rid of that menu, and now graph, the button right below it is F5. And that's our graph. Let's take a look at y is equal to x to the third. Now I don't really care what this looks like. What I'm demonstrating here is how do you handle it when you have any number up in your exponent. Third power, fourth power, fifth power, 20th power, 201st power, whatever it might be. Well, if you're already in the graph, then you just press the F1 to get to y of x, or you can press your graph button to get back into the graph. But I'll press F1 here, press clear, and x to the third. So I do x bar, and how you do a power is this caret over here. So do caret 3. Now I want to graph it now, so I want to do an exit to bring that menu down, and then I want to do F5 to choose graph. And that'll be our graph. Important part here is not that you memorize the buttons. It's important important that you understand how to work with those menus, because yours could be at a different place menu-wise. Okay, let's look at this one. Y is equal to x to the 1/2. I don't care about graphing this. I'm showing how do you handle it when you have any fraction up there. Now, it's even more than that. It's whenever you have more than a single number or a single variable. The trick to it is putting parentheses around the exponent. So we're going to type it in that way. It'll pretty much be like you see. We just have to remember to put parentheses around the exponent. So I'll press my F1 to get the y of x. Press clear. I'll do my x key. Caret is how you always do exponents. And then I'll do my beginning parentheses, 1 divided by 2, and then closing parentheses. Now I want the graph, so I'm going to do an exit to bring that down, and then I want to choose a button right below the graph, which is F5. That's interesting. Well, why is it shutting off? Let me see. X caret 1 divided by 2. Exit there, and I want to choose graph. How about if I change it to 3? Exit, graph. Interesting. Doesn't like 1/2. Let me go back to this and change that to 1/2 again. And then press exit, then we'll choose graph. It just doesn't like 1/2. Could be this emulator. That is correct what I told you to do though. So if you follow those steps, you'll get the correct graph. And what it should look like is it should look like that. I have my TI-85 somewhere. I should dig it out and play with it. But anyway, that's how you do that problem, assuming it didn't shut off my emulator each time. Now let's take a look at the square root of x. Very interesting. Okay, square root of x. So I'm going to go on my graph. I'm going to go to y of x. I press clear that out. Now the square root is above the x squared. So to get to that, I do second x squared, and you'll see the square root symbol. Now we always want to put a beginning parentheses on the square root, and then x, and then a closing parentheses. Now you actually don't need that if you just have a single variable, but when you get into more complex problems, you have to have that. Now I want to go into graph, so I'm going to do an exit to bring that menu down, and here's graph, and right below it is F5, so I'll choose that. And interestingly enough, it gives us the graph. Now when I say interestingly enough, x to the 1/2 is the same as the square root of x. So I'm not sure why it doesn't like this particular combination, but it doesn't. Cube root is another one you see fairly often. Well, to do the cube root, I'm going to go to my y of x, so press F1. I press clear to clear out whatever's there. And now if you don't see something on a button or above a button, you want to go underneath the math button. So we'll do second and then the multiplication symbol. Now here's another menus pop up. So if I go, for example, if I go to num, the one right below it is F1. Then this gives me options, and the more would go to more options over here. Then if I exit out, it goes back to here, and if I exit one more time, it goes back to here. You really have to get used to these menus. And then I do second times, and that was num. Miscellaneous. Let's see what's under there. Sum, product, LCM, GCD, do more. See this one here. This is our radical symbol. This is what we're going to be using. But before we can use that, we have to put our index in. Now our index is numbered in a slot here, which is 3. So put 3 in. And then I'm going to choose the button right below that option, which is the F4. And then I'll put a beginning parentheses, and then my X var, and then a closing parentheses. A little bit weird. First, have to put your index in, then you have to choose this option. And then we want graph, so I'll do an exit. And the button right below the graph is F5. Okay. And that would be our cube root. Well, even though it's exactly the same, let's look at the fourth root. There's just a different number here. And this one is demonstrating, you can have any number there, not just the 3. And that's our index. So again, we're going to put the 4 in first. So I'll go to my graph, press my y of x, the F1. Clear. I'll put 4 in, my index. Now I want to go to the math menu. So I do second times. And it was under miscellaneous, remember? So I do F5. I do more to go to the second page. And then this is the one I want. And the button right below that is F4. Now I'll put a beginning parentheses, X, and closing parentheses. And then I'll do a graph. So I don't see graph on here. So I'll do an exit. There's graph. One more exit. And then the graph, F5 is right below it. So I do that one. Well, I guess not surprising, since it didn't like this one, didn't like the fourth root. I wonder if it's the even indexes that's screwing it up. Let me see. I'm just curious now. Y of x. Okay, instead of 4, let me put 5. And by the way, to get to that second line, you could actually do second and then F5 to access the second line. I always like just do exit, keep it simple. And it's working. Okay, now let's go back and change the index to 6. So I come here and put 6 in for the index, and then I'll do an exit to get the graph down in this line here. Choose F5, and doesn't like it. Doesn't like even indexes. The square root is fine. What we should have saw is this looks like the square root, but a little bit closer down to the x-axis. So that's what it should look like. I haven't used my actual TI-85 calculator in probably 8-9 years. I wonder if it'll even work. Let's take a look at the absolute value of x. Okay, if you're not in graph, press your graph button, and then we'll press our y of x, clear. Now this is going to be underneath the math again, so I'll do second times. And some of these I remember where they are, some of them I just had to play. I didn't remember where that radical was, I had to search for it. Let's go under num, I think that's where it'll be. So I'll choose F1, the button right below that. And you see over here we have ABS. So I want to choose F5, the button right below that. Now it doesn't put the beginning parentheses, so I want to put the beginning parentheses, and then I'll put the X key and closing parentheses. And now I want to choose graph. Now I don't see graph anywhere here, so I have to press exit one time, and I'll press exit one more time. Get that down on this line, and then I'll choose F5. And that's our graph of that. Okay, let's look at this one right here. We got x is equal to x plus 2 over x minus 3. Now, I could care less what this looks like. I'm demonstrating how do you graph anything that's a fraction. And the trick is, if you have more than a single number or a single variable on top and bottom, you have to put parentheses around that part. So when I plug this in, I put parentheses around the x plus 2 and parentheses around the x minus 3. Other than that, I enter it as I see it. So I come over here, and I want to go into my y equals, so press F1. Press clear to clear out that line. Beginning parentheses, x plus 2. Closing parentheses, divided by, beginning parentheses, x minus 3. Closing parentheses. And now I want a graph, so I'll do an exit to bring that menu down, and then I choose F5, the button right below the graph. And this is almost our graph. The vertical line should not be there. It's not a feature. It's not putting a vertical asymptote on there for you. It's a flaw. I went out to TI's website and read. So what it should look like is something like this right here. And that'd be your answer. Now this one, I'm not really sure what we're going to discover, so we'll find out together. So I'm not an expert on TI-85. I'm just creating these because I do have students come in every once in a while that do have TI-85. The general guideline is, see how we have 3 dashes here? In our calculator, we have 2 dashes. We have a dash down here in the bottom and a dash to the side. This one on the bottom is a negative, and this one is a minus. So what we're going to try to do is figure out which one's which. If your dash is the first item in whatever, it's a negative. So this is the first dash in our problem, so this is a negative, the one on the bottom row. This is the first dash in my square root, so this will be a negative, the one on the bottom row. Now if your dash is not the first item in whatever, but it's between 2 items, like between the x and the 3, this is where it'll be a minus. And we pretty well type that in as you see it. So I'm going to go to my y equals, press F1, press clear to clear that out. Put in my negative, then I want square root, so I do second x squared. I'll put a beginning parentheses. You should always put a beginning parentheses on the square root. And then we got a negative x minus 3, and then closing parentheses. Now we want a graph, so I'll do an exit, and then I'll choose F5 because it's a button right below that. And that would be our answer. So it'd look like this right here. Okay, let's play with these minuses a little bit. Do graph, go to y equals, press F1, and instead of that negative before the x, I'm going to change that to a minus. Then I'll do exit to bring that menu down, and I'll choose graph. Now it gives us a syntax error. Now we don't want to do quit, we want to do a go to, and the button right below that is F1, and it'll put the flashing cursor on where the problem was. So it'll tell you put the wrong dash. So okay, I'll put a negative there. Well, if it tells you that you got the wrong dash, then what's the big deal? Just try one, see if it works. If it isn't, then it's the other one. Well, let's go to this minus right here and put a negative. And now I'm going to choose graph. And I don't see my menu, but let me go to graph. There it goes. And then I want to choose F5. And we get a syntax error. Now if I do a go to, oh, I didn't switch that back, did I? Okay. Switch that back to a negative. And this one, did I switch that back? Let me press enter. Okay, then graph. This is different than TI-3, TI-84. Go back to y equals. Okay, negative, negative, minus. Okay, that's the way it should be. So I do an exit. Press F5, what's below your graph. This calculator's giving me a headache just so you working this. Okay, now what I want to do is do F1. And I want to change this minus to be a negative. Do that to negative. Now if I do an exit, and I choose graph, notice it gives us the wrong graph. So if you use the wrong dash, sometimes it'll tell you, and you can correct it. Sometimes it just gives you the wrong graph, which is frustrating come test time and final exam time because you just missed the problem. So you have to know which dash is which. So I'm going to go back to y equals, and these were correct. This one should be a minus because it's between 2 items. And now I do an exit, and I want to choose graph, so I do F5. And we get our answer. Okay, let's look at a little tougher problem that merges together our basic building blocks. We got x to the power of x squared minus 3x plus square root of x. Okay, so I'll press my y equals, the F1, press clear to clear out that line, and then I do my x key, the x bar, caret for the exponent, and whenever you have more than a single number or single variable in your exponent, you have to put parentheses around the exponent. So that's a trick on this one. You have to put parentheses around that. So I'll put a beginning parentheses and then x squared. So I do the x var, push my x squared, minus 3x plus square root of x. I wonder if I'd put a times there. We'll see if it works. And so I'll do second x squared for the square root. I'll put a beginning parentheses for the square root. Then I'll put the x key in. Closing parentheses on the square root, closing parentheses on the exponent. I'll do an exit one time to bring the graph down, and then I'll do F5. Thinking. Yeah, that's the right graph. I kind of wondered since we had trouble with the ones up above. Yeah, we get something looks like that. Is that the true picture of the graph? Well, that's as good as we're going to get with a graphing calculator. If you go on and take calculus of some sort, there'll be a whole chapter about how to find the true picture of the graph. But we're happy with that. Now, back to your calculator. To exit out of anything, again, you just press your exit over and over, and that'll get you out. Okay, let's say you're not really big into technology, especially since you have a crappy TI-85. Then, let's say you liked plotting points. You're the best point plotter there was. Everybody else was happy with 3 points. Your T-charts always had 10 points. Well, we know what that graph is. That's the parabola. That's a U-shaped graph like that. Or is it? Maybe the graph goes like this. You just didn't plot enough points to see it. Maybe it's coming up like this and come back down over here. Same thing over here. Maybe where this is coming down is at x equals 500. So you actually need to put 500 points in your T-chart before you would have saw it come back down. Plotting points is the worst way in the world. Plotting points only works if you already know what the graph looks like. Now think what I'm saying there. You already know what the graph looks like. Graphing calculator is a big step forward. It doesn't give us perfection, because I could graph this, and my standard viewing window might look like this, and so it might look like the parabola. I wouldn't know that it came back down over here to x equals 500. Now later on, unless I took calculus, later on we'll see the leading coefficient test, which might help give us a better picture of what's going on, but it's still not perfect. But again, it's not bad compared to doing it by hand. Now that was basic graphing on a TI-85 calculator.